With the full base set of Elestrals finally revealed, I wanted to make this video series discussing every single card in there. I'm organizing this by element and then finally generic cards, so that'll be 6 total videos. In each video, I'll be discussing each of the cards that I group in those elements / generic, and I'll be going over my general thoughts of those cards, its meta viability both in base set as well as in the future, and some fun factors about the card, because I really want to highlight that even if it's not meta, there's a lot of cool stuff you can do about it at the casual scene. So if this interests you, let's get right into it. So Thunder is definitely looking to be the control element out of the first 5 elements in base set. It's got a fantastic slew of cards, especially at the 1 spirit count, that regardless of how Thunder does during this set, it is definitely set up well for future sets. But focusing on base set 1, the cards that I think are most notable for a meta Thunder deck, I want to talk about Elechik, Griffuse, Voltempest, Raiceros, Astrabbit, Jolten, and Mount Olympus. So 7 cards, as per usual with these reviews. And this is the first essential line that I'm really demonstrating, because if you're watching these in order, Thunder is the first one that has it, Water, Earth, and it was Fire. I was talking about more of the 1 Spirit and Rune cards. So this is going to be an interesting one. So I'm just going to jump right into it with Elechik here. Decent stat line with 4 attack. You really want to be at least 4 attack to be able to compete with stuff. Though with a lot of 5 attacks running around, well, not a lot, but quite a few 5 attacks running around, Elechik does struggle to compete with those. But it does search you out a Divine Rune, which in the Thunder specifically lets you reduce your opponent's attacks. I mean, Elechik has a lot easier time hitting over stuff as well. So it's decent statted. It searches you out a card, so you're deck thinning, and that card is at least decent to help you answer stuff on board, so you can control the board. That's quite nice. And that's not even to get into how Elechik doesn't have you just search out the Zeus for Thunder. It can search out any Divine Rune, meaning that this can be splashed in any deck that really needs to grab their Divine Rune. Well, I don't think that's too relevant right now outside of Thunder. I think that as we get more and more Divine Runes, that Elechik might start seeing more and more play, though you will need to either have a Divine Rune that can have an impact on board right when you play it to make it worthwhile, or you need to be able to take the turn to search it out and give up your normal cast for it. But still, I think that's going to lead this card to see some success and be a really interesting utility card as well, just like Sprouter for artifacts as well. And there's a few other ones, one in Thunder as well that I want to talk about. Now, it's the Jolten, which I mentioned, which we'll get to in a little bit. But in terms of meta viability, I think Elechik will definitely see some meta play, at least at first, and this will make more sense once I talk about Griffuse and Voltempest. We do need the Zeus for that one, and well, actually, you can also use Aeolus technically with this kind of build as well, so the Elechik has a double utility there with Aeolus from Wind having great utility as well. So I definitely think this card will see meta play for the Voltempest deck specifically, but I could also see this maybe seeing some play in just any Thunder deck at all. Decent stat line, ability to search out Divine Rune, which lets you control the board. Not too bad, it's just a little expensive. But in terms of future viability, I definitely think this card has some future viability depending on what Divine Runes we get. It's just a matter of, can we give up our normal enchant is giving up our normal enchant worth searching out the Divine Rune? And in terms of fun play, this card will definitely see play for any deck that needs to search out their Divine Rune. I think Thunder strategies like it all. Again, good stat line. It searches you out a card, thins your deck for 1. That card can have impact. So I think for fun now and in the future, this card's definitely a great consideration. Moving over to Griffuse here, the Ascended form. This one, we can ignore everything except its ability, where it can Nexus 1 Thunder or Wind from a Divine Rune to ascend into Voltempest from your hand or deck. And this is really what this card's used, just to get into Voltempest here. And this is why Elechik is so nice, because you really want to see your Divine Runes, and it's just a lot easier to search them out, especially when Elechik has a decent stat line, and those runes can help you answer the board, or at least that Zeus can help you answer the board as well if need be, or you can get some utility off of Aeolus. It just fits in perfectly with this and helps with this deck and helps really enable Griffuse. But of course, Griffuse is only as good as Voltempest is, and spoiler, Voltempest is looking to be pretty strong. So in terms of meta viability, I think Griffuse is definitely meta viable. I do think that you'll see, I'll get to that in Voltempest. I'll explain more in Voltempest, but I do think as the meta develops, we'll see this card kind of drop off a little bit, but I think it will always see play, at least for base set 1. In terms of future viability, I think that's where it's more limited, just because I imagine that we'll get more ways to answer stuff like Voltempest and Griffuse in the future. So this deck probably will not, unless it gets more support that helps it against those answers, I think this deck will probably push more towards rogue territory within future sets and eventually fall off. So Warriors and just have fun with it. And in terms of fun viability, this card's definitely always going to see fun play because regardless of Voltempest's meta viability, I think it will always be just a fun strategy to play regardless, and you'll want Griffuse to more easily get into it. But with Griffuse out of the way, gotta talk about Voltempest here. This one is the big payoff, and boy is it a big payoff. It does have really great stat lines, but the more important thing is that burn 3 from just disenchanting it. And this is why you want to run Griffuse, especially because Griffuse actually gives you that first spirit on it that you can disenchant without losing Voltempest. So you just automatically get to burn your opponent for 3, and that's great because you don't attack. And especially in set 1, we don't really have many ways to interact with Voltempest outside of triggering on attack. So yeah, that's really good. The fact that if you're worried about, say, a shield that your opponent has set, you can just burn your opponent and not even attack with Voltempest, and your opponent can't do much about it right now. But really what I think is the cherry on top for this card, it's debatable, honestly. I think if this card just burned it, actually, no, I shouldn't say it's the cherry on top. This card needs this effect for it to be really good, and that's just the protection effect as long as you have Zeus on the board. So now your opponent has to remove the Zeus before they can even begin to touch Voltempest. It makes it really expensive to deal with, which is really good as well. And I think that protection effect is the reason why this deck is looking to see play, because it's just a blanket protection effect. Your opponent cannot touch Voltempest outside of stuff like shield, but again, because this card burns, you don't need to attack with it. If you're worried about shield, just burn your opponent until they can't do anything, because each turn you just enchant it, burn your opponent, good to go. And if your opponent doesn't have shield, or you can remove shield, you can enchant it, burn it, attack for 3. So you did 6 that turn. This is really powerful, and it's definitely one of the almost easy picks right now in an unsolved meta because it's just so obviously powerful. And the reason why I also said with Griffuse why I think these cards will fall, so I should get into meta viability before I go into this. Meta viability, definitely very viable, powerful, big body that really can work its way around your opponent's answers. Your opponent needs to deal with that Zeus for them to even be able to touch it. That means it's at least a 2-card combo, which is really hard to deal with, and it's not an easy one to attack over whatsoever, especially with all the 3-spirit Elestrals being pretty vulnerable to removal. So really good there. And I do think this was getting into that this card will probably fall off over time as the meta becomes more solved. People find more ways to answer it and such. I imagine it's going to be one of those that's really prevalent because it seems strong. As people learn how to answer it, it's going to drop off a little bit because people are actually answering it. And we'll just see the kind of meta evolve around that, at least initially. But it's still, I think, going to be good. But in terms of future viability, as I kind of said with Griffuse, I see more answers popping up. And unless this deck gets support that can specifically help Voltempest deal with those answers, I think Voltempest will slowly fall off over time. But regardless, I think this will always be a fun strategy because it's the original big boss monster that's immune to anything, everything, can deal tons of damage. It's going to be a lot of fun to see how this develops, at least in the fun space, and also the meta space, depending on what other cards Thunder does get. Moving over to Raiceros here, this card really helps with the Ascension strategy, because obviously if you can't get something to stick on board, it's really hard to go Griffuse into Voltempest, and Raiceros solves that. The first big floodgate card for Elestrals besides Flaracne, but the big difference about Raiceros is you can just normal enchant it. You don't have to ascend into it, making it so much better. 4 defense is solid. If a deck doesn't have a 5 attacker, they can't get over this card. And furthermore, if they don't have a card that's printed 5 attack, they really can't get over this at all, because the easiest way to get over Raiceros outside of card effects is to misenchant a Necruff, per se, or a Sorlet. Those are naturally 5 attack. They can hit over Raiceros if you go to Thunder Spirit. But this just makes this card super annoying. If your opponent isn't ready to deal with it or doesn't have the answers at hand, they can fall super far behind. And yeah, dropping a Raiceros on turn 1 with some protection, like from counter runes, just really gets you're controlling the board so well, setting yourself up really powerfully to, again, get into Voltempest. But even past this also enables a ton of other Ascension strategies or just more control strategies in general, because it slows down your opponent by 1 turn. They lose out the ability to interact and deal with the board that first time they play out an Elestral, unless they're playing around it. And that's really, really powerful, especially with so many limited responses right now. So in terms of meta viability, Raiceros is definitely meta. I think this card will see play in a control Thunder deck. It's going to see play in Voltempest Thunder as a way to slow down your opponent to more easily get into Griffuse, into Voltempest. But even past that, I don't think this will see experimentation in under other Thunder control style decks. I don't think those will be as meta as Voltempest, but still really great. And in the future, while I think there will be more answers to this card, so there's a good chance that it will fall off there. At the same time, as we get more ways to help Raiceros stick on the field, I do think this is still going to be a very annoying control tool for sets to come as well. But in terms of fun viability, very fun viable card. This pretty much lets Thunder have some of the most consistent ways to ascend into stuff. Other elements do have their own, but I do really like how Raiceros also slows down what your opponent can do. It's going to be great to just enable a ton of stuff, and I'll get into those with the other ones, but pretty much in set one, if you're running an Ascension strategy, I think you'll include Raiceros. Until we get a better way to kind of turbo into our Ascensions, I think Raiceros is just going to be the way to go with Thunder. Moving over to Astrabbit here, this card really makes Thunder so much better as a control deck, because you just get to check top 3, add a card to hand, and it's got the 5 defense, which is really hard to get over. The only one Spirit Elestral that can get over this unassisted is Molestation, and even then your opponent has to expend 1 additional water to be able to do so. That's really, really powerful. Now, top 3 admittedly isn't too many cards to look at, but at the same time, it's still better than, like, it's still good. It's still better than drawing 1. You get to check top 3, choose the best one, add to your hand, and of course, for those of you who aren't aware, you do not reveal it to your opponent. So that means you can safely add counter runes, set them, your opponent will have no idea what they are. That's really good, and with a phenomenal stat line making it really difficult for your opponent to hit over stuff, this card's going to be obnoxious. Just right now, I could see going turn 1 Astrabbit, grab a top card, and set some counter runes face down, and now your opponent, unless they have Molestation, they're going to have to commit multiple cards to board to try to deal with this, meaning you can more easily punish them for doing so, and Astrabbit lets you see how to protect it so much better. So I do really like this card. Obviously, if you don't have the counter runes to protect it, it can't as readily get into Ascensions as, say, Raiceros does, but having both these cards be annoying defensive walls that help your deck in certain ways just sets up Thunder to be really, really good overall. Just a stall tool, a tool that's annoying to get over and pluses you, a more controlled plus. That sounds phenomenal. For sure, this is going to definitely be considered for control decks, combo decks. There's probably a few other archetypes that I'm blanking on right now. Those are the 2 that come to my head that they would love to see this tool, so it's great. So in terms of meta viability, very meta. I could even see maybe some decks trying to throw this in. I don't think any of those decks will be meta per se, so I'm going to hold off on that point, but definitely meta right now for Voltempest, be able to more readily search out your Griffuses, your Elechiks, or your Divine Runes, or really Elechik to get your Divine Runes, whatever you need, your protection cards, your back row destruction, whatever you need, Astrabbit can more readily grab it for you. And in terms of future viability, I definitely think this has a lot of future viability just because it's got a great stat line. And as opposed to Raiceros, which allows your opponent to have control on how to answer this card, Astrabbit, you get its value right away. So it's more proactive than Raiceros. So I think it definitely has more longevity. And I could definitely see this card being run in more decks than just Thunder, just to be able to look at top 3. That's going to be great. And then on top of that, I think there's also a bit of meta viability if Thunder gets a good spirit passing kind of deck to abuse the fact that Astrabbit's ability is not once per turn. So if you can move multiple spirits to it, you can just continue to check top 3. And I could see that being really powerful to kind of dig for some pieces, maybe like a combo deck and such. And a lot of this also applies to fun. So I feel like that more like spirit passing, probably more likely to be in the fun category, but at the same time, checking top 3 to grab a card seems really powerful, so I could definitely see that having a meta impact. But in terms of fun, this card's definitely going to be great for fun strategies. It's going to help enable combo decks. It's going to help enable decks that just need a little extra draw engine, and I think that's even outside of Thunder. So I really like Astra. It's just a really solid, proactive card with a great body. Moving over to Jolten here, this is another one that has a great 4 attack stat line. Obviously, 5 would be better, but 4 is really what you need it at. And just its ability to search out a stadium room is great, and it kind of makes it a pseudo 5 attacker, as long as you're running, well, at least for Mount Olympus, because you cast Mount Olympus, and Jolten's now a 5 attacker. It does require an extra spirit, but that spirit isn't tied to Jolten, so that's pretty good as well, as opposed to maybe like Artifact. So I really like Jolten. I think where it lives right now is just with that any mono Thunder deck, or not even necessarily mono Thunder focused deck is a better way to put it, such as the Voltempest deck. Just an easy way to search out stadium room, sets up for 5 attack, more easily trade or run over stuff is going to be great. And with so many 4 attackers as well, within Thunder, Elechik being a perfect example, there's just even more cards that appreciate that extra 1 attack that Jolten grabbing Stadium can provide. And of course, for our more defensive tools like Raiceros and Astrabbit, that just makes those even more annoying. So I think that this card is a great card that, because it can search out Mount Olympus, has some great proactive value. Also has some great utility value moving forward as well. It's that deck thinning. Yeah, I do really like this card. So meta viability, I think this card will be meta for thinning out the deck of a Mount Olympus. Power up your 4 attackers to make them more readily able to run over stuff. I also think just being able to grab a Stadium to cancel out your opponent's Stadium is also really great. I know Voltempest really appreciates all your defensive tool, really appreciate it. You'll appreciate the deck thinning to draw into different cards more readily. So all in all, I do really like this card for the deck. Future viability, it all depends on what stadiums are in place, so it technically does have a lot more potential, but just kind of like Elechik with the Divine Rune, it just depends on, can you give up your normal enchant to search those out? Is that justifiable? Is the meta slow enough? Does the card have a big enough impact? Those are all questions that need to be answered. So definitely pay attention to this card, because I feel like there's a good chance it'll pop up here and there, even outside Thunder, because it's just any stadium. And fun viability, this card, again, is going to be loved in fun decks, especially those that want to search out their stadiums and such. Again, it just comes down to, can you give up your normal enchant for that? That is the big question, but definitely as we get more powerful stadiums, more synergistic stadiums that we really need, Jolten will definitely see play there. And just a 4-2 Slatline is decent, which makes this card definitely really great in Thunder, outside of Thunder. Yeah, I really like this card as well, hence why I'm putting up in the first 7. I kept mentioning Mount Olympus, and I wanted to put it there because this card's definitely going to be run if you're running Jolten. Again, it just allows your Thunder Elestrals to hit 5 attack real easily, release the 4 attackers, makes your Raiceros and Astrabbit even more annoying defensive bodies, destroys your opponent's stadium without having to use a card effect, meaning it can weaken their Elestrals. All in all, I just think it makes sense for the meta deck right now. It's really solid, really good. So in terms of meta viability, very meta right now. And kind of like all the stadium runes moving forward, I think it's a really solid stadium to have access to, but I do think it's going to fall off. It's going to be considered probably one of the weaker cards. I don't think gaining 1 attack and 1 defense will be as impactful, especially over the long run. It's just really impactful right now when those minute changes in stat lines really do matter. But it's a good stadium to still have as default if you need a stadium, because we might get better stadiums, we will also get our fair share of stadiums that aren't necessarily better. So this card will be nice to see. That's for future viability. And then for fun viability, I think it's a lot of the same that I said for future viability. Really nice right now. It'll help decks that might need some extra attack points. That'll be nice for those fun decks. But all in all, I imagine we might see some more stadiums that want to run with more. When I think fun decks, I think more zany strategies, just kind of out there combo pieces. And I think Mount Olympus is a nice card if those kind of decks just need some extra attack stats, and Mount Olympus can really, really help with that. And I realized I talked in a circle there. What I was trying to get at was, but at the same time, those more fun strategies might also rely on a different stadium effects to do so. So remember this card, as it may come up, but I don't think this is a one that you really need to pay super attention to, as it's a good generic card, but not like an insane specific card for a strategy. So I think those 7 cards will definitely be seen in the Voltempest deck, and also a lot of those will also be seen outside of Voltempest deck and any other Thunder deck that is run, just because they're really solid cards. But Thunder has even more good cards that I just couldn't really fit in there, and I think that these cards also fall more in line with maybe side deck cards or tech cards, so I didn't want to put them in there. So I'm just going out of the way. I want to talk about Boombatt and Thunderstorm. I almost said Thunderbolt of Zeus, but no, Thunderstorm. Starting off with Boombatt here, I just think having a simple 1-for-1 trade, you just enchant your Boombatt, then disenchant and destroy it, is really good to have access to. It's a lean Elestral effect, and sure, you're giving up your normal enchant, sure, you're giving up tempo on the board, but when you're ahead on tempo and just need to kind of secure it a bit more, Boombatt's great. And I think a lot of times in a control deck like Thunder, you'll be fine doing that 1-for-1 trade, as a lot of times you're just trying to control the board while building up to something. So you don't necessarily care that you're left with no Elestrals on board, especially if you have some back row to help deal with it. So I really like Boombatt. I think this card's really going to be a phenomenal side deck card. for decks that you really just need to shift it in because you really just need that simple out to an opponent's Celestial. It gets around Rune Protection. It doesn't get around Elestral Protection, but then you just don't decide it in if you're having to deal with that. And for that reason, I really like the card. So for meta viability, I think both now, I think now it has the most chance of being included in the main deck, mainly in like Thunder decks, as it just has a good effect. It can help you kind of stay ahead on board. And I do like that aspect of the card. I've definitely used it to some success for that reason. And also I think there's enough cards that have various protection effects that more so, I think those will fall more into the fun space, but some of them might try to break through to the meta. You'll just want this one in general. Honestly, at worst, if your opponent has like a Elestral out, even if it's like a 1-spirit, maybe 5 attacker, you just don't have an answer to it, sometimes it's just fine to Boombatt it. So for meta, I definitely think it has the most potential right now. Seeing play in the main deck, but I think moving forward, it will mostly be a side deck card if you really need the really lean, cheap destruction, and you don't care about losing your normal chain. You just need to get rid of something your opponent has. And for the fun space, I think it serves that same purpose, though to an even bigger degree, because I think you'll see more of those cards that you just need, that have various protection effects, that you just need a Boombatt to answer it, to have a chance to. So I really like Boombatt for that reason. Thunderstorm, I think, is another phenomenal side deck card in the long run, but for right now, actually, I shouldn't even say that. Thunderstorm, I think, is going to be one of those cards that will bounce between side and main deck. And right now, I don't think you really run it in the main deck, unless outside of some fun decks, but I do think it has a lot of potential. And that is, I'm trying to think how I want to break this down, so I'm going to go with this first. I think that some decks will love just the targeted rune destruction, get rid of a back row that might be disrupting what you're going to do. Because a lot of times, especially later in the game, your opponent just has one back row. You're trying to stick something big. You don't want to get shielded. You don't want to get PTA'd. So you just Thunderstorm, get rid of it, and you can just continue. And sometimes that's definitely worth 2 spirits. But I think that falls more in the fun category right now. In terms of meta, I think it's just more efficient to force your opponent to use the spirits on that rune for spirit exchange, because this is worth 2 spirits. So that's why I don't think Thunderstorm will really be run. I do think it has a chance for some Voltempest players to run it, just because it's just a nice way to try to deal with some stuff so they can't interrupt your Voltempest combo. Mainly get into Griffuse, because really once you go Griffuse into Voltempest, as long as you have Zeus, your opponent really can't touch it. Because again, the only thing, because PTA would be offline because Voltempest can't be targeted, and then you just don't attack to run into shield and such. So where I see this card falling, I'll get that into more meta, but yeah, I'll save that for more meta discussion. But in terms of, no, I'm just going to go to the meta discussion. I think I've gave my general piece on it. So meta right now, I don't think it's meta right now, but as the meta develops, I could see this being run just to more securely get out your Voltempest, as people probably find different ways to answer Voltempest, mainly targeting on the Griffuse turn. I could see stuff like Pandora's Box definitely countering, or maybe even a Gorgon's Gaze. And because those have to be set first, you can just Thunderstorm before you do your combo and you're good. In terms of future viability, I think this is where this card lies. I definitely think as we get more cards, more ways to disrupt stuff, more cards that you might want to combo into, such as like Voltempest-esque stuff, that you don't mind giving up 2 spirits, you'd rather just stop your opponent from disrupting it, because those cards are totally they will swing the game for your favor so much that you're fine using the 2 extra spirits to Thunderstorm something. And in terms of fun viability, this card really helps fun decks that can't necessarily deal with runes or don't really want to run into runes as the more efficient answer. So this card definitely will stick around for fun strategies. So, and for both future meta viability and fun strategies, I really think this card will have to be power crept for this card not to be a consideration if you really need to get around runes. Sonicore is a pretty powerful card in the extension of Boombatt, though, and it just shuts off the ability of your opponent to use their counter runes as long as it's an attack position and when you play it out. So you're pretty much allowing yourself a free turn to do whatever you want without your opponent really being able to interact at all with their back row. And that's really powerful. But it's really only powerful if you have like this huge swing turn that you want to shut off your opponent's stuff. And I don't think Sonicore really provides that as is right now, nor does the support around it. You can get it out pretty easily, but if you're shutting down counter runes, you really want to be ending the turn right then and there, or find ways to give Sonicore some more protection, because 1, you're shutting off your own counter runes, so you can't rely on them, but 2, there's plenty of ways to also answer Sonicore right now in the forms of stuff, even like Boombatt lets you answer it, but stuff like Lord Earthquake, resting on your laurels. they all deal with Sonicore, or even if there's a way, there's a few ways right now. Actually, I don't think there's a way. Change that. I was supposed to say there's a few ways to change its position, but that's not true right now since they're all on counter runes. But Sonicore here, it has a powerful effect, but I think this one, it needs more support. I think where this card will seem pretty powerful right now is if you can use Raiceros to control your opponent's board and build wide while also answering their opponent's Elestral each and every turn. And then you can always just drop a Sonicore to slow them down, shut them out of your counter runes, and just close out the game that way. But I think most of the time your opponent will probably have played counter runes to try to keep up on tempo and such. So as such, I think that this card has more potential in the future as it gets more cards supporting it, supporting getting out of it easier, supporting more heavy swings on your opponent, taking advantage of it. But at the same time, I also think it really hurts that it turns off your counter runes as well. As now, if once we get more ways to maybe easily ascend, my opponent might more easily be able to attack over Sonicore, and you just can't do anything about it because of your own Sonicore. So in terms of viability right now, I think it's more fringe. Might see some experimentation, but I just don't think the payoff's quite there despite its powerful effect. I think it would be more impactful on a one Spirit Elestral and probably a bit problematic. But in terms of future viability, I could see this card again seeing some more like rogue play. Definitely not defining a deck, but maybe being an addition to some decks that can really need that rune turn off to close out a game potentially. So I think it has some viability there with some additional support, but I think overall it's going to be relegated to more fun strategies, just more fun Thunder decks that just want to turn off your opponent's counter runes and go ham for however they choose to. And I think Sonicore is going to be a lot of fun for that. So moving over to a bunch of Ascension pairs that don't really fit into anything right now. They have some cool effects, but they really need some more support to really round it out. And that's kind of how it is with control, is you can't just have a ton of just willy-nilly control pieces. You kind of need the control pieces to flow together. So I decided to group all these together with an additional card that really didn't fit into any of the groups right now, so they're more just like cards to watch out for. But anyway, there are Ampup, Lycavolt, Sparkitt, Gatobolt, and Thunderbolt of Zeus. So 5 cards here. I'm going to start with Ampup here. Very interesting card that lets you discard and expend a Thunder Spirit to just add 2 Ampups from your deck to your hand. It's deck thinning. You're getting a technically card advantage because you're going +1 off of this skill, which is interesting. But the problem is they're just Ampups, they're 3/3s. They don't have great stat lines. And unfortunately, right now, there isn't too much that can really benefit from just having additional cards in hand. My first thought is probably some discard synergies, just having some extra Elestrals you don't mind pitching for costs and such. We just don't really have that right now. And as such, for meta viability, I don't think Ampup's that meta right. It's not meta right now. It has some future viability for sure, but it really needs the right deck that really wants those cards in hand for costs or various effects, as opposed to just 3/3 bodies. As long as it's just getting 3/3 bodies, especially when you have to expend 1 Thunder. But there's a possibility. But I think this card will definitely exist in the fun territory, especially with the section form Lycavolt synergizing with it. Especially if we get some more synergies and such, I think this will make a really fun deck that really likes the extra Ampups. Again, I really feel like it's going to have to be discard synergies. There might be other synergies, such as stuff that buffs Ampup. It really just needs those more, and I think that will just exist more in a fun space. Moving over to Lycavolt, its Ascended form. The reason you really want those Ampups, and why I think this card makes the most sense, is because Lycavolt gains attack for each Ampup in the Underworld. And now Ampup is not the best way to ascend into this card, so you do get 1 setup and taking attack, which isn't too bad. So maybe it's just fine to use its ability to get the 1 discard and try to get into Lycavolt, hit a attack. That's really good. Elestral struggled to hit over it, but I imagine that really you want something more to be able to use those Ampups for than just using spec to get 1 into the Underworld. But it's also nice that Lycavolt here also gets to look at your opponent's hand and discard a card. Just get rid of that 1 card that you don't want to deal with that your opponent might have that might answer your Lycavolt, such as an Earthquake, for example. So that is also really great. It does have to attack over something, meaning that your opponent has a chance to counter its attack. So that is also of note, but it definitely is a powerful effect if you can find ways. Maybe just attack over something where your opponent has no answers on board. That's going to be pretty powerful, but I also don't think it is too notable right now just because usually hand sizes are pretty low. And the individual cards, I feel like they're simultaneously more impactful and less impactful. And what I mean by that is that the power difference between the cards themselves isn't too drastic. So discarding one doesn't feel as good, but it does feel as good as well because there isn't as much draw as well to keep up on card advantage. So it really depends on the matchup. Overall, I think this is an interesting effect. I just don't think it's too relevant right now. So for meta viability, definitely not meta. Future viability, maybe. I think that the deck, if it gets further support, will have better ways to utilize maybe the Ampup discard for synergies and such than necessarily Lycavolt as a payoff. So I think that's where this deck would live if it ever is meta. For fun viability though, this card's definitely going to be fun for fun strategies, just powering up your Lycavolt, discarding cards from your opponent's hands. That sounds like a blast with support as a payoff card. Making this card a better payoff card looks really intriguing for a fun deck for sure. Speaking of discard, Sparkitt here is another discard synergy card. It is the nexus to look at your opponent's hand and discard card, so you get information on your opponent's hand to be able to better counter it. Just get rid of whatever card you don't want your opponent to have. It does have 4 attacks, so it has a really great, it has a decent stat line here, just like all the other ones. Get some benefits from there. But the reason I didn't list it with all the other ones is its effect I just don't find very useful for the same reason I was talking about Lycavolt. The information is nice, but a lot of times when this card finally comes out, when you're finally nexusing, your opponent's played a lot of their cards, so you're getting a lot less information than what probably makes this card worth it. It doesn't really have an impact on the board either, which hurts it. And you're moving around spirits, so you have to commit more spirits onto board. You're probably moving around possibly to Sparkitt, meaning that Sparkitt's a bigger target to remove because it might have 2 or even 3 spirits on it, and doesn't have an impact on the board itself. And I think that really holds back the card. That being said, though, there's definitely some future viability in this card, just for some stronger discard decks to really force your opponent maybe to a top deck position. Might be interesting, again, with Nexus abilities, that this card also can enable passing spirits around. I've already seen a fun deck that uses Toxia from the trial deck with Sparkitt to move spirits around to burn your opponent for 1, discard them for 1, and force cards out of their opponent's hand. I think that is definitely something to watch and pay attention to. So in terms of meta viability, not right now. I don't think the discard and hand information is super relevant, and it just takes a bit too much to set up. You'd rather do other things, such as ascend into Voltempest. But in terms of future viability, I'd say watch out for this card. I could definitely see this card popping up and having some fun shenanigans and also being really obnoxious. Just kind of with some more discard support, just forcing your opponent to a top deck scenario could be really, really obnoxious. I don't think the hand information will ever be too relevant, but the top deck scenario will be pretty good, especially with the good stat line. And in terms of fun strategies, I think that more likely you'll see this in more of a fun discard strategy deck that just really wants to just nuke your opponent's hand. It just needs more support to be able to better control the board, better set up for Sparkitt's ability, and yeah, that's pretty much Sparkitt. Its Ascension form Gatobolt here is an interesting one because I don't feel like it really synergizes with Sparkitt whatsoever. It's got really great stat line and hit attack. It hits over a lot of stuff, especially the 2 spirits. And it's got a way to buff stuff up further, so it can help assist your other Elestrals in hitting over stuff. It's not relevant right now at all. It's too easily punched like all 2 Spirit Elestrals, and most of the time if you're ascending, this is going to be your only Elestral out on board, unless you're already ahead, which at this case is really just a win more card. But that being said, though, if we get more ways to swarm the board, I could definitely see this card being really interesting as a way to really answer multiple stuff on your opponent's board, buff up your Elestrals to be able to more easily hit into stuff. So since I expect Swarm to have lower stat line, so just being able to Swarm, go into Gatobolt, and help your other Swarm pieces kind of buff up to hit over stuff, definitely has some potential there. Meta viability, not meta right now. Future viability, I don't think so with it being Ascension. It has some potential, but I think overall that there'll just be better payoffs for every single deck that might like Gatobolt. But in terms of fun strategies, I don't really think this could be fun for a Swarm deck, as I said before. Just buffing those up to help you hit over stuff seems fun to me for every Thunder Spirit on it, so it's a +2/+2 each turn for free with a great stat line. That seems pretty fun. Finally from this group, Thunderbolt of Zeus, the artifact. This one I put here because it's an interesting card. 2 attack isn't bad. Being able to burn your opponent for even more spirits, not too bad. It just feels like one of the weaker burn cards because you're having to attach an artifact to an Elestral to do so. Meaning you're kind of putting all your eggs in one basket where you can answer that Elestral. And then on top of it, it feels like that, especially in Sparkitt, it doesn't really have any board impact right now. Thunderbolt of Zeus doesn't have that synergy that some of the other artifacts have within their deck, past it just being an artifact, which I think really hurts this card overall. So in terms of meta viability, I don't think it's meta right now. I don't see why you'd run it without some synergies. Future viability, it definitely could have some if we get some better like board impact control tools that want to Nexus Spirits around. Yeah, I could see it. Or other cards that want this to be on board that are really good. It would need a good payoff. But I think really that this card will live more in fun strategies as an extra burn option. If you get more synergies with it, then it will be really good. But I just don't imagine those breaking past anything but a fun strategy. Again, it's nothing so much with this card effect. I just don't think the effect is as remarkable to attach this to an Elestral and put a +2 spirit on that Elestral. For burn, especially in this deck that's more control, you don't really want to waste all your spirits on that. You just want to control the board. And without this, these artifacts really feel like they just either need to do something insane or they need the deck synergies such as Scythe the Demeter with Earth or Hammer of Hephaestus with Fire to really see, or even protection effects like Trident Poseidon, but to really see play here. So that's Thunderbolt. Remember this card, but I think it's going to be outclassed by future artifacts in general as well. Rounding out this Thunder review, got the final Ascension line that really feels like it's going to be its own thing, so I kind of saved up for its own. It's Quackle, Cygnetrik, and Ohmperial. So starting with Quackle, it's just a simple recover 3 Thunder Spirits. This one, I know Sluggle in water does pretty much the same thing, and it's considered really good, but I don't hold Quackle as in high regard because it doesn't have the same synergies with the deck as Sluggle has. And that's mostly due to Foamy being able to float into it, Caprable being able to summon it again from the underworld to get that recovery. Quackle, you have to use up your normal enchant. I just don't think that's worth it for that stat line, even for 3 Thunder Spirits. So all in all, meta card, no, I don't think so. Future viability, I don't think so as well. There's a chance there's a meta where the Recover 3 is phenomenal and you don't mind giving up your normal enchant for it, but I find that very unlikely. This will really need synergies such as Sluggle and Foamy for Thunder to make this card, I think, worth it and for it to see play overall. And again, for fun strategies, I feel like there's just better things you can do if you're playing a fun strategy than Quackle. So unfortunately, I think this might only see play in an Ohmperial deck, and that's just to recover some spirits for Cygnettrik's ability. But overall, I think this is relatively an underwhelming card. So moving over to Cygnetrik here, the Ascended form of Quackle. This card lets you turbo into Ohmperial. All you need is 12 Thunder Spirits in your spirit deck. So really easy to get out, doesn't actually cost you anything, but I think this condition's a lot harder than people will give it credit for, and will have you build your deck in a way that overall hurts it more than benefiting it. And the reason why I say that is because 12 Thunder Spirits is a lot. That usually means you're running, for the most part, a mono Thunder deck or a huge primary focus Thunder, because really you need at least 14 Thunder Spirits to make this work, because you need the one electric normal enchant to ascend into it. But more realistically, you will need more than just that, more than just those 14 Thunder Spirits, because sometimes your opponent might have the answer to it. So this is really looking to be almost like an 18, maybe 17 Thunder Spirit deck, if not just a full 20 to make it work. And Thunder has some good cards, but I just don't think the payoff of Ohmperial is worth it. It can definitely get into Cygnetrik with stuff like Raiceros, but yeah, you really also need to max out on your Cygnettriks here. You need to see them in your first few turns before you've really whittled yourself down below 13 spirits to be able to get this off. That's a tall ask for this card. So in terms of meta viability, I don't think it's very meta, because there's going to be games where you just don't draw into it, and then what's the point in running it? There are going to be games where you see all of them when you really need to see some other cards, and that's also going to hurt it. And honestly, the payoff of Ohmperial, I just don't think it's worth warping your deck around as much for that. So not meta. I don't think it really has much. I shouldn't say it doesn't have much future viability, but you're going to need a lot more Thunder Spirit recovery to make this worth it. And I feel like if you have that much recovery, you can do better things than Cygnetrik into Ohmperial, honestly. And a lot of times you might just be able to build up into the Ohmperial through other means. And in terms of fun strategies, yeah, this is definitely going to be fun. High roll Ohmperial and try to use this effect to win the game off it. Yeah, that sounds like fun to me. I think we'll definitely get some more cards that will help it see play, help this deck out a lot as well in the future. But I just don't see it being very meta. I just don't think that how you have to warp your deck is worth it. And sure, we might get some better Thunder Spirit cards to maybe make a mono Thunder deck. But again, I just think the cards you need to make this work, they can be used to better success elsewhere, for meta play at least. For fun play, oh yeah, it's going to be fun for sure. Finally, we got Ohmperial here, the ascended form of Cygnetrik, and it gains 1 attack for each Thunder Spirit in your Spirit deck, so of course your opponent's Spirit confirm that, you need to show them that. That means it's a big hitter, and that's quite nice. I don't know how it's going to be too relevant, just because right now, at least right now, really, if you get a 3 Spirit out, it's going to be really hard for your opponent to get their 3 Spirits out as well, outside of a few cases. So that definitely means the attack is less impactful right now, but I could definitely see it being more impactful as we get more ways to turbo out into these 3 Spirit Elestrals, and it doesn't necessarily matter if your opponent has board control or not. But I think more importantly, spend 1 Thunder, destroy a card. That's really, really good. So in that regard, I was talking about Cygnetrik, and I don't think Ohmperial is the best payoff. And that's just because while it can destroy 1 card on the field, if your opponent has multiple sets, I guess you could just not attack, but it doesn't have any inherent protection, so it's easily disruptible. But in that regard, though, I think it's definitely going to be a high roll deck, because if you can get Ohmperial to stick and start just popping cards, that's really strong. Deal with your opponent's Elestral and attack the Spirit deck directly. Deal with your opponent's back row, maybe get rid of a shield, attack your opponent's Elestral. It's going to be able to easily hit over stuff. So I definitely see some potential for this card as a big high roll deck, but at the same time, there's still stuff like Resting on Your Laurels, Earthquake, Boombatt. They can all deal with the Ohmperial, and that might also hold this card a bit back because it doesn't have the inherent protection effect and is also not the easiest to get out as well. So for meta viability, I don't think it's meta. For future viability, there's a chance, depending on what support we get for it, but I think all in all, that whatever supports Ohmperial will support other stuff better or just not be good enough. And for fun strategies, again, just a fun turbo strategy with Cygnetrik, start popping cards and blow out your opponent. That's where I think it's going to live, and it's going to be a lot of fun as well. So that is it for all the Thunder Elestrals. It has a really solid core for this set, with Voltempest being the top end, and a lot of great 1 Spirit utility cards for supporting pretty much any Thunder package in the future, and kind of rounding off with a ton of interesting just 2 Spirit, 1 Spirit Elestral combos that needs more support for them to be become better, but stuff that I think will be interesting to see how they develop, especially in the fun space moving forward. So as this is just one of the elements from the base set, I've got a playlist with all of my other reviews linked down in the description below, and there'll be a card up above as well, so you can check out all the parts that I've already uploaded. And if you're watching this before I finished uploading all the parts of this series, please consider subscribing to my channel, turn on the notification bell so you're notified when I upload more content, as I will be getting out the rest of the parts. I'm doing like every other day, roughly, so they will wrap up shortly as well. So if you want to be notified, please do that. And of course, I love the discussion here, so please leave your opinions on these cards down in the comments below. Do you agree with me on some cards? Do you disagree with me? Please let me know. I'm not saying I'm right about all these are just what I think about them, and I love the discussion to further develop my opinion, and I think it helps all of us. But of course, look forward to more content coming out from me real soon. Once I'm done with this base set review, there'll definitely be deck profiles, gameplay, more discussion videos, all the bunch. I have a blast making these, so definitely expect more content coming out from me real soon.